Hi, Nathan. How are you? I'm Asim Chabra. Thank you very much for making your time available.
No
So,
problem.
yeah, I actually watched the film this afternoon again for the second time. I think I saw it. I'm trying to remember if I saw it at the Toronto Film Festival or New York Film Festival, one of the two. Um, and more than anything else, I'm amazed at how this film started. I mean, you just happened to hear about a student who was going on a strike outside the Swedish parliament. And I'm curious about at what stage did you say this is potentially a much bigger story than what I'm doing right now? And how did bring together resources, including finances, to do a film so quickly because the story was unfolding right then and there? So I'm curious about that, first of all.
Yeah, but as you say, it's very much one of those documentaries that happened by chance, and it actually started with a tip. I got a tip from a friend of mine who knew Greta's family a little bit. That she was going to do some kind of a small manifestation outside the Swedish parliament, and decided to go down there to do some kind of a recce and see if she was interesting, which is like typical. And then it evolved, after I said I would give it 1 or 2 days to see if she was interesting, and then bypassers came and other journalists, but it was fairly domestic, and it actually took until sometime in the winter of 2018 when the school strike started to spread to actually Australia and Belgium, two countries where the movement got much bigger, and instead of just having a few hundred people on the streets of Sweden and Norway, suddenly there were tens of thousands of children. And I think it's sometime at that point I started to understand that this was a much bigger story. And also then before that, we had been able to get some early funding from the Swedish SVT, which is the public broadcaster equivalent of like the BBC in Sweden. But it was still, a frame of I really didn't know what to do with the material, and it was still kind of in a Nordic context. But as the movement spread internationally, we were of course able to fund from other countries that were interested in her story, and that was kind of a step-by-step process.
And as a documentary filmmaker, I mean, you went to just checked out to see what she was doing. Did you suddenly have all this time at your disposal that you were suddenly going to commit yourself to a year and a half of filmmaking? I mean, it is, good luck like this for a filmmaker. It's amazing, really. But how did you suddenly make your life available to this project suddenly? I'm sure you had to juggle around a lot of things, right?
Yeah, but I actually spent not much time on it in the beginning. First, the strike was just going to be something for the Swedish election. So and then we didn't have much funding, and I talked to my boss, and I was down there. I went sometimes on my lunch, and I had other projects going on. And then it wasn't until actually, as I said, that the movement got really big, like half a year later, that I really started to spend full time on it. And I think it's a classic. Many documentarians, I think, recognize this very special kind of process of when you're following reality, that you don't really know how to kind of plan your life, and you kind of juggle around a few projects and try to kind of spend time like here and there. And then when one of the projects really kind of goes into the position of oh, now things are moving here, then you kind of decide that's the project you focus on. So it's really to follow documentary processes. It's much about being available and being kind of staying alert in a sense.
Yeah, no, I can understand, really. One thing becomes very clear, it's very clear from the film, that because she has Asperger's syndrome, she is very focused, tunnel vision kind of a thing. And when she talks about how she can keep reading things for a very long time, with that kind of a focus and that kind of a mind, how did you win over her? How did you win her confidence? I mean, I'm sure you also interacted with her father and her family, but for her to be able to completely trust you that you were going to be absolutely following her, what was the process like that?
No, but I think many documentary filmmakers in this kind of new media world, we actually have the luxury of not having a deadline, not having to deliver our material so quickly, so we can spend much more time with our subjects. And I think spending time with someone is the most important thing to be able, first of all, to understand that person, but also to build that kind of relationship of trust. So in the beginning, when I was filming, I didn't have any access, and I just came to this tiny, street. And as you can see in the film, in the beginning, it's fairly much kind of taking place at that place. But then, during the winter, I came back over and over again, and I started to kind of get to know her, and she started to understand kind of why I was interested in this, and with all that time, then also when she started traveling, I asked, if I could join in those trips as she goes with, electric car and train.
Yes,
And
yes.
Sweden is, to give you some geography of Europe, it looks like we're a part of Europe, but actually Stockholm is very far off.
Right.
So, going with the train takes like 36 hours. So it's also that kind of, then you have more time to talk. And I think that kind of built this very special kind of trust that was then making me able to capture moments that we haven't seen before.
Yeah. At what stage do you think, I mean, she was very committed to the cause, of course, and then suddenly it exploded. I mean, with the strikes, and then she was invited to Poland for that UN summit. That was probably the first one, right? The Poland summit, I think.
Yeah, I think it was
Yeah.
the first thing.
Yeah. At what stage did she realize, and I guess that's how you also realized, that this was becoming a definitely a larger story? Until 18, 19 months ago, until less than 2 years. I mean, last year, early part last year, very few of us had actually heard of her. And suddenly she was in news in early 2019. So I'm just curious about how, and I'm sure when she realized that this was a story, therefore she felt that your recording the story was very important also.
Yeah, I think it's a really good kind of analysis. And I think, as you say, that it kind of, in that sense, it kind of connects. You, of course, know that she's been very open about that she doesn't kind of really like to be in the spotlight and so on. And I think at the time when I really kind of started to focus my documentary more on her, because in the beginning I was just more kind of capturing things, not knowing if it was more about the movement or her. That was a time when she had already kind of became a person in the spotlight. And it must have been, as you say, somewhere around the meeting in Katowice, I think. Then the strikes had become big, and she had gotten a lot of kind of traction for that speech that she held. So I think that was definitely the moment when she understood that this was growing as well.
Yeah. No, she's such a fascinating child. I mean, I can't call her a child really still. And I guess she evolves. I mean, she grows herself as a person. How did you, when you were watching the film, were you thinking that also that she's evolving? That look how she's changing. I mean, the confidence that she gets, for instance. I mean, you had the camera, because I actually saw the credit. You were also the camera person for the film. But the moments when you were off the camera, when you spent 36 hours in a train or something like that, you must have seen this child evolve into something. I mean, she became a global figure. And I'm curious about that understanding.
Yeah, but it's of course it's very special to be kind of following a person that you don't kind of know since before always. But it's extra interesting, of course, when you follow someone who's a teenager, because of course we all know that in those kind of years, you kind of things happen so quickly, and you form your personality. So it was definitely a part of the story, without spoiling too much, is of course a coming of age kind of thread where you can see how she changes and grows up more and more. And definitely that was something that I understood, of course, from following her during that specific year, because I wouldn't say that this is a biopic. I don't think it's kind of, I don't think you can do a biopic about Greta at this moment. I think it would be unjust in a sense. So I would say it's more of a kind of a year in a life, and more of a prequel, kind of setting up this person. It's one of those kind of films, and during that kind of prequel, I saw a big part of the development, and maybe we will see more in the future.
Yeah, that'd be great. Your film is so well made, it's so well edited, for one thing, and I think the soundtrack is so that the soundtrack just pulls you into the film. I mean, music can be very important for some films, and in your film, it really pulls you in. But you were on the scene when you were watching her give speeches, when you were watching her getting selfies with famous people. I mean, you didn't have the editing and what we had the privilege of watching with the soundtrack. How exciting was it for you, all those moments?
No, but it was, of course, that's the beauty of filmmaking, and especially documentary filmmaking. It can be a very kind of lonely process in a sense when you're kind of out collecting the material,
Right.
following what's happening, and what
Yeah.
then happens, of course, when you go into the editing and the compiling of a movie. What
Right.
happens is it becomes very much of a teamwork,
Yeah.
and being able to work together with Yoon and Rebecca, who made the soundtrack, and my
Hmm.
editors.
Hmm.
Everyone kind of saw so many layers in the kind of material that I had captured, and the kind of the music makers, composers, they were very quick on seeing kind of, oh, but it's interesting how she's so, it's her she likes to kind of repeat the message, and as you
Hmm.
say, she's very focused, and they
Hmm.
created this score which is actually building on some kind of repetitive
Hmm.
motion. And the
Hmm.
same with the editors, they also kind of started to see kind of the details and nuances of how Greta could kind of jump between some being very serious and being kind of very teenager, and then they kind of started to juxtapose those scenes, which suddenly became so kind of telling, I think, for the year that I saw.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So I think the beauty of working together with a team when you're in
Hmm.
that moment is
Hmm.
that they can really enhance and kind of lift the things that you saw out there in real life, in a sense.
Yeah. You said you traveled with her. I'm curious, did you also go on the boat trip to the US with her?
Yes, that's correct. I was shooting that as well. It's this thing, I remember at the office, because I decided to shoot everything myself. I have a background as a DOP, because I wanted to be able to kind of get into those closed rooms of the high political leaders. And then if you have lots of crew, it's always hard.
Right.
Um, but when she said, that she was planning to sail over the Atlantic, I suddenly was like, oh no, why did I take this decision of filming this myself? That
Yeah.
means that I need to go on the trip as well. So yeah, it was a bumpy ride.
It looks more than a bumpy ride. Why didn't they decide to take a cruise? There are cruise ships between UK and the US, right? It would have been a lot smoother.
Yeah, I don't think there are many cruise ships actually going over the
Okay.
Atlantic on winter. And also, what we tend to forget sometimes is that international shipping and these boats, they use a kind of a bunker oil, a very thick oil, which is actually not very good at all. So I think, of course, she wanted to see and try. And I remember
Right.
she posted on her social media accounts to see
Yeah.
if there was anyone who could hitchhike, give her a ride on sail. So I think she just threw it out there as a try, and was lucky to have these guys being able to help her.
So how many days was the sail trip from UK to New York?
So it was a little bit more than 2 weeks. I think
Oh
now in
God.
Corona time, we all know how long a quarantine is. It's somewhere
Yeah.
around 2 weeks. So
Yeah.
imagine that time in a small kind of carbon fiber a kind of boat shaking around. It was
And you didn't get seasick at all?
I got very seasick. I think I was seasick all the time,
Oh God. Oh
more or
God.
less. And it's also,
That's
we used other kinds of cameras shooting on the boat, and it was very hard, to because one of them had a very small viewfinder. So it was, I hated looking through that small viewfinder at the same time as the boat was moving. So I tried to just shoot like 45, 35 minutes per day to kind of not get too exhausted.
Yeah. That speech that she gave in the UN General Assembly when she says, "How dare you? How dare you?" And the German Chancellor is sitting there, of course. Um, I mean, were you aware that the speech was going to be that direct and angry?
No,
Were
no,
you shocked, taken aback?
yeah, it was very special. That was one, like the shoot in the UN was one of the few shoots where we had a bigger team. So we had several cameras, and it was more of a big setup. And I spent lots of time in the UN building to kind of set that up. and I had no idea what the speech was going to sound like. And I remember that just like when she was starting to speak, I kind of said, "Oh, this is becoming so emotional, and this is becoming so kind of direct on point." And I remember just how it felt like the speech went in like 2 seconds because we were all so kind of
Yeah.
amazed by it. And I think one
Yeah.
thing I used to live in India when I was when I started my career. I actually started my career as a stills photographer and
Okay.
lived in Mumbai,
Okay.
working for a few Midday, the good old
Oh,
tabloid,
yeah.
and Rolling Stone and Man's World and Yuva, some of the magazines. So
Oh,
I've had,
wow.
and it was interesting also because I think Greta has something which I actually recognize from my time in India, which is this very kind of directness, which I love with being in India, of people kind of speaking their minds in a sense, and not maybe sometimes kind of censoring their ideas. And I think
Yeah.
it's something which is so kind of so vivid, and I think it's definitely something that connects her to India in a special way.
Wow, that's amazing. So where do you think, it's unfortunate that this pandemic happened, um, when her movement was suddenly taking up, and she was speaking at all these gatherings. So this 1 year, we haven't heard anything from Greta, and I was so happy that your film came out at least. Um, where do you think the climate change movement is? I mean, one good news out of the US is that now that Joe Biden has been elected, he's sending John Kerry to represent, and the US is going to be back with the Paris Agreement. But beyond that, I mean, I'm actually, where do you think the movement is, and how do you think Greta was able to really change the whole conversation?
No, but of course we all know kind of what happened during those kind of 2 years when before the pandemic, and I can only speak from kind of a European and Swedish context. But what happened was that the kind of discussion, it really went from being kind of a page 48 item in the news to going to front page, and a lot of kind of chronicles and op-eds were kind of starting to focus on the climate in a way which I've never seen before. And of course, now with the pandemic, I think it's been hard for us to kind of juggle two
But
crises at the same
sorry,
time.
sorry for cutting you. But when it became the opinion and page one story, it was essentially because Greta was suddenly creating this news. Is that, you think so?
And yeah, but
Some,
in Sweden, definitely it became like, of course, it's been a lot of writing about Greta, but at the same time, the kind of discussion of like, where are we at the moment when it comes to our emissions, and also the focus on many of these kind of climate disasters that was taking place over the world. They kind of moved from being some kind of sluggish back end news to actually moving forward. And I think that the kind of what's so important with activism is that it's like the accumulated knowledge of a topic. It kind of builds and builds upon it, upon
mhm,
something.
mhm,
So
mhm,
I think as we maybe now, as I said, it's hard to juggle two crises at the same time, which is sad
mhm,
because we're losing time in that sense. But I
mhm,
think that the accumulated knowledge that she and many of these school strikers have created during 2018, 2019,
mhm, mhm,
that's a that's a fundament. So
mhm,
when this kind of COVID crisis is starting to kind of flow away, I think
mhm.
definitely that we will kind of see how that will, yeah, we will be at another position with when it comes to that discussion about climate change still, because of that building.
And I think a lot has to do with, as I said earlier, I mean, the fact that your film has come out just around the time when we are midpoint of this crisis. Suddenly, now we are talking about the climate crisis through your lens, really. And I think you have a very strong shot at being nominated for an Oscar. You might even win an Oscar, really.
Thank
But
you.
that would really take it to another level. I'm sure, right? I mean, I'm sure you're aware of it.
Yes, of course, and it's been a privilege, of course, to be able to speak to and do all these kinds of events, and the film has been going around the world, and it's been so nice to see how many people has been so emotionally moved by her story in different cultural contexts, from South Africa to today speaking to you guys in India, as hearing that people kind of can take the message with them,
Right.
and so that's fantastic, and I think that's maybe the beauty of filmmaking, I remember myself when I watched An Inconvenient Truth by
Yes.
with
Al
Al
Gore.
Gore, and that was one a very kind of key moment for me in being interested in this topic. And Greta herself, actually, as she talks about in the documentary, saw a film about climate change. I think it was something more of a natural
Yeah.
history film. So I think filmmaking really has this ability to make us understand the climate crisis in a kind of new way. And maybe, as you say, now when we're in lockdown and we have time to reflect on like what we are as human beings and where we stand in relationship to the future, I think it's really good that we watch these films and start
Yeah.
that thought process.
I keep thinking of you as a filmmaker. You just went to check on this girl little more than 2 years ago to see, and here you are at the cusp. You could potentially be winning an Oscar in a few months. How has, no, but seriously, it is true. And you made a really powerful story. It's not just that, Greta is a very strong subject, but your filmmaking technique and, as I said, the editors and everybody else, you made a very strong film. Tell me about how you changed in this last 2 years. I'm sure you were rushing to capture the story, and Greta was in news and she was traveling everywhere. But in the process, were you noticing how it was affecting you and how it was changing you?
Yeah, I think, and actually, I think it's interesting in a sense because I always try to kind of go with my curiosity, and that was why I went to India to work for when I started my career, because I was kind of curious of the culture there. And I think I went very much with my kind of curiosity during this entire kind of year when I followed Greta, and tried to kind of stay with the story just by kind of seeing like what am I curious about. Okay, I want to see how she reacts meeting the Pope or something. Then I went on that. And I think what I've learned during this time is how important it is for us as documentarians and journalists to kind of stay curious and not kind of get tired of a story and tired of a character, but try to kind of build that curiosity up again and again into new situations. And I think when we were moving towards the end of shooting, I went in to do interviews with Greta, which is kind of has formed her narration in the film. And in the original language, in the Swedish version, and I think that's the same as you guys have. It's those kind of recordings and those kind of diary notes that is her narration. And I think why she opened up and started to kind of read from her diary, and why those interviews became so intimate and good, was because I was still curious of her, even though we had kind of known each other for a year. When I went to the interviews, I still had questions, and I still had that curiosity. So I think stay curious.
What year were you in India? When was that?
That must have been like 2008, 2009, I think, sometime that time.
So for a year, how long were you there?
Yeah, I think almost a year, a little bit less.
Wow.
So it was,
that's amazing.
it was fantastic.
Yeah. How's Greta doing now? I mean, I'm sure you are in touch with her, and she's obviously aware that the film is now sort of become a huge success in the film festival circuits. How's she doing, and what is she up to?
Yeah, of course, we don't have the same contact today as when filming, but we kind of chat sometime. And what's interesting is that during the film, she says that she's going to take a sabbatical year, and that sabbatical year ended in like this summer. So then she started her first year of high school here in Sweden. So it's been, in that sense, it's probably been a little bit good of a timing with the pandemic to kind of be able to settle in and start school and so on. And as she's, we all know of her, she's really one of those people that love, school and learning and so on. So what I've understood, she really enjoys kind of studying in that sense again.
And she's aware of the fact that the film has taken off, really, right? That the film is being shown so much.
And it's been so interesting also. And I'm so happy in the sense when I showed the film to her that she kind of has spoken a lot about how she recognizes herself in the portrayal. And that, I think sometimes in the media, she's been framed very kind of stoic and as something who's very serious about herself. And I think in a sense that she is happy that the movie shows her as this more kind of three-dimensional being, and is happy that now people are starting to understand that she's much more than just this screaming, angry
Yeah.
girl in the UN.
No, there are some wonderful moments when she's laughing at some photograph, her father's photograph with the Pope, for instance, or
Yeah,
she jokes around despite her condition. I mean, she has a sense of humor, obviously, and as a child. It's one, and you capture it all, which is great, really.
yeah. I
So,
think I think also one of the things that made this documentary is kind of, as you say, of course, your curiosity can kind of keep your fire going, but it's
right.
also been so interesting following Greta during that year, and kind of being able to hear her and understand her humor, because
Yeah.
she's actually much more funny than I think we've understood. And
Right.
that's such a great thing when you follow someone, to be able to laugh together,
Yeah.
and have that humor.
Yeah. Nathan, I am so happy that you, first of all, thank you for joining us, really. And I'm so happy you made this film because it's opened all of our eyes to a very, very important story. And my God, what a wonderful portrait you have created of Greta, really. So, really, congratulations. Any
Thank you
last
very
words
much.
for people of India, that since you had such a good time living in India?
No, but of course, it's with the cinematic tradition of Bollywood, and the love of cinema in India. I'm so happy that it's now finally going to reach you guys, and
Yeah. So,
I'm looking so much forward to be able to come back someday and talk
yeah.
more about the movie.
So congratulations and good luck with the Oscars. I have a lot of faith in this film. When especially when I've watched it the second time, and I'm like, this is really a solid documentary, and you deserve all
Thank
the
you.
success. So
Yeah,
thank
we
you.
worked we
Yeah,
worked hard on it. Thank you very
yes,
much.
good. Thank you. All right, bye
Okay,
bye.
bye
Take
guys.
care. Bye bye. Yeah.